So we push all these socially risky parts of ourselves into the shadow and pretend they're not there.
You might think you're lost. You might think something's wrong with you, that you're too angry, too chaotic, too broken, too much. But what if that wasn't true at all? What if all those emotions you've been trying to suppress, your jealousy, your rage, your envy, your sadness, weren't flaws? What if they were a map? When darkness speaks, listen. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life walking the invisible edge between science and soul, believed something most people still aren't ready to hear. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your compass. Yes, it's the part of you you've spent years trying to outrun, the part you judge, the part that makes you feel ashamed, the version of yourself you've been told to fix, hide, medicate, or spiritualize away. But Jung didn't see the shadow as a mistake. He saw it as the key to purpose, the key to healing, the key to finally feeling whole. Because what hides in the dark isn't just pain, it's potential. And when the shadow stirs, it's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to wake you up. Jung wrote that the gold is in the dark. That's not just poetry. That's a spiritual truth most of us are too scared to test. Because facing the shadow doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like descent. It's messy. It's personal. And it starts with a question no one wants to ask. What part of me have I abandoned? Maybe it's the voice that still hurts from childhood. The one that was told to be quiet, grow up, stop crying, or stop being weird. Maybe it's the fire that burned too bright. The creativity, the hunger, the weirdness, the rage that had no place in a neat little life. Or maybe it's the part of you that's just tired of pretending. Whatever it is, the shadow holds it, keeps it safe, buried, until one day it starts to leak. It leaks through your triggers, through your arguments, through the things that make you cry when no one else understands why, and you think it's weakness. But Jung would say, no, that's the call. That's the shadow saying, you're not done yet, you've left something behind. In many indigenous traditions, especially in the Andean worldview, the concept of sombra, the shadow, is not seen as evil. It's seen as sacred, as something that must be walked with, not denied. In these cultures, a person who knows their shadow is considered trustworthy. Why? Because they're not controlled by what they refuse to see. They've entered the underworld and brought back truth. Jung, in his own way, said the same. He believed that unless we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our life, and we'll call it fate. That means your shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background, it acts. It shows up in your relationships, your addictions, your self-sabotage, your shame, your silence, your rage, and it will keep showing up until you look it in the eye and say, what do you want to show me? That moment, that turning toward your own darkness, is the beginning of your real spiritual path. Not the one with incense and mantras and vision boards, the one where you finally sit down with the parts of you you've judged the most. The one where you find out that your rage wasn't trying to destroy people, it was trying to tell you you were crossing your own boundaries. The one where your sadness wasn't weakness, it was a deep knowing that something important had been buried too long. The one where your jealousy wasn't about the other person, it was your soul begging you to stop abandoning your own gifts. Suddenly the shadow isn't so scary, because it's not darkness for the sake of darkness. It's the part of you that still remembers your light, and it wants you to reclaim it. But that reclamation isn't loud. It doesn't look like fireworks. It often begins in silence, in stillness, in the quiet moment where you realize, I don't need to keep pretending to be good. I need to be whole. Jung's personal journey proved this. At the height of his fame, he walked away, left the world of public success and went inward, into what he called the night sea journey, the descent into the unconscious. It was terrifying. He thought he might be losing his mind, but he kept going. He painted, he wrote, he listened to the voices inside him. He allowed the madness to speak, not to obey it, but to understand it. The result? The Red Book, a mystical, luminous record of what it means to confront your shadow and live through it. Jung said that meaning doesn't come from fulfilling your persona, it comes from integrating your shadow. That's why so many people feel empty at the top, because they've built a life the world applauds, but the soul mourns. That doesn't have to be your path. You can let the cracks show. You can listen when the old emotions rise. You can admit that the voice in your head saying you're not good enough might be a lie. But the pain behind it, that's real, and it wants your attention. Because buried in that pain is your deepest why you're here, what you're meant to change, what you're meant to heal, not just in the world, but in yourself. The Sufi mystic Rumi once said, "Don't turn away. Keep your gaze on the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you." Jung would agree. The wound is not your shame, it's your portal. So if you feel like you're falling apart, what if you're actually falling into yourself, into the truth you've been circling for lifetimes, into the one thing no one ever taught you how to do? Face your shadow with love, not to destroy it, not to fix it, but to finally understand that it isn't your enemy, it's your origin, it's your mirror, and it's the first step on the path to purpose. The archetypes that hide in your shadow and what they want you to remember. You don't choose your shadow, it forms quietly, at the edge of your childhood, in the places where you were told to hide, shrink, or stay quiet. It collects everything you were punished for, everything you were ashamed of, everything you weren't allowed to be. But the shadow doesn't stay buried. It waits. It waits until you're strong enough to look. And when that day comes, it doesn't whisper, it roars. It shows up in your reactions, your projections, your patterns, and the more you resist it, the more power it takes. Carl Jung knew this intimately. He didn't just study the shadow, he wrestled with it. He wrote about how the soul cannot grow if we only identify with the light. The real journey, he said, begins when we're brave enough to face what we've hidden. But not everything in the shadow is ugly. Some of it is your strength, your voice, your clarity, your creativity, your sexuality, your boldness. These things were buried too, because they frightened someone, or because they didn't fit the story you were raised to live. That's why the shadow isn't evil, it's unlived life. And when Jung looked deeper into this unlived life, he discovered that the shadow wasn't random. It often took shape through archetypes, ancient roles or energies that live in the collective human psyche. You've seen them in myths, in stories, in your own dreams. One of the most powerful shadow archetypes Jung described was the wounded healer. This is the part of you that carries pain not to stay broken, but to help others heal. It's the teacher who was once a lost student, the helper who knows the wound because they've walked through it. You may think your pain makes you weak, but this archetype says the opposite. Your pain may be the very reason others feel safe around you. It may be the way your soul speaks to theirs without needing words. Another shadow archetype is the trickster. This one shows up when life keeps pulling the rug from under your feet. It forces you to stop clinging to certainty. It makes you laugh at yourself. It's uncomfortable, even chaotic, but it clears the path for a more honest you. It tears down the masks you didn't even know you were wearing. Then there's the orphan. This archetype is shaped by early abandonment, emotional or physical. It creates a deep longing to belong, often leading you to chase love in all the wrong places. But when brought into the light, the orphan becomes deeply compassionate. It doesn't just heal, it holds space for others who feel like they don't belong either. And then we have the destroyer. This one scares people the most, but it's not a villain. It's the part of you that knows what must end. The job, the relationship, the old identity. It burns the house down not out of hate, but because something new is meant to rise from the ashes. Most people run from the destroyer, but the brave learn to listen to it, because it's never random. It only comes when something has been dead for a long time, and you've been pretending it's still alive. These archetypes don't live outside you, they live in you. They speak through the parts of yourself you've tried to silence. And when you start to notice them, not judge them, not fear them, just notice, your whole story begins to change. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you cannot do that by staying in the light alone. You must walk into the cave, and in that cave you'll meet the part of you that holds your next step. In many mystical traditions of Latin America, particularly in Andean cosmology, there is a deep reverence for duality, light and dark, life and death, above and below. They say that a soul cannot become whole without walking the path of both the upper world, Hananpacha, and the lower world, Ukupacha. The upper world gives you vision, but the lower world, that's where you find power. The shamans of the Andes would descend, sometimes through caves, sometimes through deep meditative states, into the Ukupacha, not to get lost in darkness, but to retrieve parts of the self that had been fragmented by trauma, fear, or loss. They called this soul retrieval. Carl Jung called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. Different names, same truth. You cannot retrieve your purpose without facing the parts of yourself that have been cast aside. You cannot serve your highest calling while leaving your deepest pain unacknowledged, because the shadow holds more than wounds. It holds the keys, the key to your gift, the key to your truth, the key to the version of you that's not pretending anymore. So the next time you feel triggered, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" try asking, "What part of me is trying to return?" That reaction may not be weakness, it might be memory, of a time you felt powerless, of a moment you had to hide. But the present is offering you a new choice, to bring it home, to stop running, to listen. Because when you do, something shifts, you stop repeating, you start integrating, and what once felt like darkness becomes fuel, not to destroy you, but to remind you, you were never incomplete, only hidden. The mirror that doesn't lie. After confronting these, you'll face a moment when the story you've been telling yourself begins to crumble. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. You can feel it as a subtle ache, a tug beneath the surface of your routines, a silent voice whispering, "There's more to you than this." And for a while, you try to ignore it. You busy yourself. You cling to success, to safety, to stories that sound good in public, but ring hollow in the quiet. Yet no matter how tightly you hold on, the discomfort grows, not to punish you, but to remind you. The part of you that doesn't speak in words begins to stir, and with it comes the shadow. It doesn't announce itself with drama. It doesn't kick down the door like some mythic monster from your nightmares. Instead, it slips in quietly, often through the places you least expect. A sudden reaction you can't explain, a relationship that always brings out the worst in you, a dream you wake from feeling like it knew something about you that you didn't. That is how the shadow moves, subtle, persistent, and always honest, because the shadow never lies. It shows you exactly what you've refused to see, and it does so not to harm you, but to heal you. It's the mirror that doesn't flatter, the reflection you've edited out of every version of yourself you present to the world. Carl Jung knew that true transformation doesn't begin with light. It begins with the courage to face the dark. And the dark isn't evil, it's what's been exiled. It's the grief you weren't allowed to feel, the anger you were told was shameful, the desire you labelled as bad, the hunger for more that you buried beneath politeness and performance. These are not mistakes, they are memories, pieces of your soul that were sent underground when you were too young, too scared, or too conditioned to protect them. But here's the truth. What you bury doesn't die. It waits, and when it returns, it doesn't ask for revenge. It asks to be remembered. It asks to be held. It asks to be given a seat at the table of your life, not to take over, but to reintegrate what's been lost. The moment you stop running from your shadow, you begin to recover the very parts of you that carry your creativity, your power, your clarity, and your purpose. In Eastern traditions, particularly in the teachings of Tantra, there is no division between light and dark, sacred and profane, divine and human. The goddess Kali, fierce and untamed, dances on the threshold of terror and transcendence, not to destroy the soul, but to strip it of illusion. She is not a demon. She's the face of awakening that shows up when gentler paths have failed. And the shadow, in many ways, is your personal Kali. It arrives not to curse you, but to show you what you've outgrown. It's the death of pretending and the birth of truth. So many people think they're broken when the shadow rises. They think they've failed, lost their way, fallen behind. But Jung would tell you otherwise. He would tell you that what you're experiencing is not a breakdown. It's a sacred unraveling. It's the part of the story no one wants to live through but everyone needs in order to evolve. Because your shadow is not random, it's precise. It knows what parts of you need to be tested, triggered, and torn open in order for the real work to begin. And the real work is not to fix the shadow, or cleanse it, or spiritualize it into something palatable. The real work is to sit with it, to listen, to ask, what have I not allowed myself to feel? What have I rejected in myself that is now demanding to be seen? Because once you start asking those questions, you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, you create space, not just for healing, but for wholeness. There is a moment in many ancient myths where the hero is swallowed by darkness, Jonah in the belly of the whale, Inanna descending into the underworld, the Buddha under the Bodhi tree confronting Mara, the Lord of Illusions. In every case, the darkness is not the end, it's the threshold, the womb of transformation, the place where false identities are stripped away and the soul remembers what it came here to do. Jung understood that these stories weren't just mythology, they were maps of the psyche. He believed that within each of us is an archetypal journey, one that cannot be skipped or outsourced or sped through. The descent into the shadow is not a detour, it's the path. And the further you're willing to go, the more deeply you'll uncover the purpose that's been buried beneath your pain. Because pain, when ignored, festers. But pain, when honoured, reveals its origin. And that origin often points directly to your calling. The thing you've been through, your shame, your silence, your survival, that's not just your wound, it's your wisdom. It's the very soil from which your purpose begins to grow. When you finally turn toward the shadow and ask what it wants, it doesn't answer in rage. It answers in memory. It shows you the child who needed to be held, the teenager who was never told they were enough, the adult who built an entire life out of fear of being seen. And as you sit with those pieces, not to judge them, but to reclaim them, you begin to feel something shift. You begin to feel whole. And that wholeness is your power. Not the kind of power that dominates, the kind that roots, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it has nothing to hide. So maybe this isn't the breakdown you feared. Maybe it's the becoming you were born for. You're not here to escape your darkness. You're here to carry light into it. And in doing so, you become something the world desperately needs. A soul that knows itself. The cave beneath the world. To elaborate this idea, let's take a look at a belief passed down quietly in some strands of the Kekchi Maya tradition. It speaks of a cave beneath the world, a hidden realm known as Xibalba, where souls descend not just after death, but in moments of deep inner collapse. Most assume it's a version of hell, but those who've truly studied the old teachings know better. Xibalba is not a punishment. It is a mirror realm, a place of confrontation, challenge, and eventual revelation. According to the myth, you don't reach Xibalba by mistake. You are called there. When something in your life no longer fits, when your path begins to twist into unfamiliar darkness, that's the invitation. Not to run, but to descend. Carl Jung may have never heard the word Xibalba, but he knew it intimately. He called it the night sea journey, the descent into the unconscious, and like the Maya, he knew that the darkness you enter isn't just darkness, it's intelligence. It tests you, not with cruelty, but with precision. It asks, will you face the truth of who you've become? Will you let go of who you're pretending to be? In Jung's Red Book, the descent is not a metaphor. It's something he lived. He spoke with gods, demons, and archetypes, not to escape reality, but to understand it more fully. He allowed himself to break open. He let the unconscious speak, and from it, he discovered something most of the world still refuses to believe. The thing we call the shadow is not chaos. It is initiation. In the Kekchi myth, the hero twins are summoned into Xibalba. They face traps, illusions, and death itself. But with each trial, something deeper happens. They remember who they are, not as warriors, not as saviors, but as souls with a task. And this is where the myths and psychology meet. The purpose of the descent is not to be destroyed, it's to remember. You don't walk into the dark to become someone else. You walk into the dark to reclaim what was buried. Somewhere inside you, you already know this. You've felt the pull. You've seen the signs. You've had the dreams. You've noticed how certain people in your life seem to press ancient buttons you didn't know you had. You've watched yourself react in ways that don't match the current moment because they come from something deeper, something older. That's the shadow speaking. And when you ignore it, it doesn't go away, it grows louder. Not to scare you, but to break the illusion that you can live only on the surface. because a soul that avoids its own depths becomes brittle. It chases purpose without ever feeling it. It searches for light and finds only spotlight. But a soul that walks through Xibalba, that walks through the cave, that one becomes alive. The world doesn't need more polished masks. It needs souls who've been broken open and chosen truth over comfort. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But he didn't mean terrifying in a bad way. He meant sacred. He meant radical. Because to accept yourself fully means embracing what others told you to cut off. It means holding your envy, your rage, your hunger, your grief, not as weaknesses, but as keys. Keys to your power, your clarity, your purpose. And that's the twist. The cave doesn't steal your light. It shows you where it was always hiding. In modern psychology, we're often taught to label the shadow as a problem to manage. But in older traditions, in Xibalba, in Jung's Red Book, even in the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, the descent was the rite of passage. Not everyone comes back from it the same, but no one comes back without truth. And that truth, it's yours now. It begins with a whisper. You're not who you were told to be. It grows into a roar. You're not broken, you're birthing. So the next time you feel the weight of your own emotions rise like a tide you can't hold back, pause. Don't fight it. Listen. Ask. What part of me have I ignored? What wound am I pretending not to feel? What dream have I abandoned? And then let it speak. Let the rage show you where your boundaries were crossed. Let the sadness tell you what needs to be grieved. Let the shame remind you of the moment you stopped being yourself just to be accepted. This is the path of the soul returning to itself. This is the myth you're living through, even now. It is not weakness to descend, it is wisdom. And if you find yourself in the cave, in your own version of Xibalba, remember this. The hero twins did not survive by strength alone. They survived because they remembered who they were, why they came, what was waiting on the other side of the dark, and so will you. Some people come into your life like sunlight, others like fire, and then there are those who don't feel like either. They arrive like a storm, fast, loud, unsettling. But if you look closer, really look, you'll see something extraordinary. They're not here to ruin you. They're here to reveal you. Carl Jung understood this more than anyone. He believed that one of the most powerful ways the unconscious communicates with us is through relationships. Not the peaceful ones, but the ones that make us flinch. The ones that expose our hidden wounds. The ones that stir a strange, unexplainable reaction inside us. You think you're just annoyed. You think you're just frustrated. But you're not. You're remembering. This isn't about blame or judgment. It's about recognition. The people who trigger you the most are often carrying the exact energy your shadow is trying to make you face. They press on the parts of you you've kept buried. They embody the qualities you deny in yourself. They activate the very patterns you've been trying to outrun. But why? Because that's how the shadow works. Not through logic, not through calm reflection, but through provocation. In Jung's framework, this process is called projection. The unconscious mind sees in others what it refuses to admit in the self. It paints your disowned parts onto the people around you and then begs you to react. It's a trap, yes, but it's also a gift. The co-worker who makes you feel invisible, the friend whose confidence feels like arrogance, the partner who leaves you aching in silence. They are not just players in your story. They are teachers, carriers of messages, reflections of the very traits you most need to integrate. In Eastern philosophy, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a similar idea. It's said that certain people appear in our lives not to comfort us, but to show us our karma. That what we call conflict is often a mirror of unresolved energy between souls, sometimes from this life, sometimes from others. They call it the wrathful teacher, the one who doesn't hug you, but shatters you, so you can finally rebuild as something real. Jung didn't shy away from these truths. He didn't believe we meet people by accident. He believed we're drawn magnetically to those whose wounds echo ours. Sometimes we fall in love with them. Sometimes we can't stand to be in the same room. The reaction doesn't matter. What matters is what it awakens in us. Think of the last time someone deeply triggered you. Not in passing, but in a way that clung to your bones. Did they make you feel small, powerless, angry, unworthy? Now ask, when did I first feel that way? You may find it has nothing to do with that person. and everything to do with you, your past, your silence, your lost voice, your unmet need. That's the shadow. It doesn't show up in stillness. It shows up in the chaos of connection, and if you only see the surface of that chaos, you'll keep missing the message. This doesn't mean you should stay in toxic relationships. It doesn't mean every person who hurts you is sent from heaven. It means you have to discern. Are you being harmed, or are you being shown the wound you've refused to feel? There's a story in Sufi mysticism about a man who goes to a wise teacher and says, "I am angry all the time. No one respects me. Everyone triggers me." The teacher smiles and says, "Good. That means the sacred fire has been lit. Now stop blaming the matches and find what's dry within you." In other words, stop running from the reaction. Start asking what it's revealing, because the more you fight your triggers, the more they grow. But the moment you face them, with curiosity instead of defense, something ancient begins to soften. You begin to integrate. The shadow is not about fixing yourself. It's about finding yourself, especially the parts you left behind because someone once told you they were too much. The people who trigger you are messengers of that forgotten self. Their words may sting, their presence may burn, but if you listen closely, they are pointing you toward your purpose. Maybe they challenge your voice because you were meant to reclaim it. Maybe they ignore your needs because you were meant to stop apologizing for them. Maybe they walk away because you were meant to finally walk toward yourself. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." It's not spiritual to avoid people who challenge you. It's spiritual to let those challenges teach you without letting them define you. So next time you're triggered, don't just react. Pause, breathe, ask, what part of me is waking up right now? And then thank the trigger, not because it was pleasant, but because it was honest. The soul doesn't come here to stay comfortable, it comes to evolve, and every person who disrupts your peace might just be the one who delivers your deepest growth. Your dreams aren't lying. Now, imagine this. You wake up in a cold sweat. Your heart is racing. The dream felt too real. Maybe it was a nightmare, maybe it made no sense at all, but something in you knows. It meant something. You just don't know what. Carl Jung believed that dreams were not random, not just brain static or leftover thoughts. He saw them as conscious messages from the unconscious, and often the most honest voice your shadow has. You can lie to yourself during the day, you can wear a mask, pretend, numb out. But at night, when the world is quiet and the ego sleeps, your truth gets louder. This is why dreams matter, especially the ones that disturb you. We're not talking about the comforting dreams where you're flying or walking through fields of light. We're talking about the ones that unsettle you, the ones that show you what you don't want to see. Jung said these are the most important, because the shadow rarely speaks in soft words, it speaks in symbol, myth, fear, distortion, and repetition. And it speaks when you're finally quiet enough to hear it. Have you ever noticed that the dreams that shake you most often have no logic, but somehow feel like they've told you the truth? That's because the unconscious doesn't speak English or Spanish or any earthly language. It speaks in images, in emotion, in archetypes. It pulls from your personal life, yes, but it also taps into something ancient, collective. What Jung called the collective unconscious, a shared symbolic language passed through humanity's deepest psyche. So when you dream of a snake, a cave, a storm, a child lost in the forest, you're not just seeing random scenes, you're seeing symbols, each one holding a message from the part of you that's been exiled. The shadow doesn't want to stay hidden. It wants to be known, it wants to be integrated, and dreams are often its loudest knock. There's an obscure teaching in the Bhagavata Purana, one of India's sacred texts, that says, "The soul that ignores its own dreams is like a bird that refuses to use its wings. It is not grounded, it is stuck." In other words, if you're not listening to your dreams, you're walking blind through your own story. Jung spent decades analysing his own dreams and those of his patients. In fact, much of his Red Book, his mystical journal of inner transformation, was shaped by dream work. He didn't just study dreams, he entered them, drew them, wrote from inside them. And what he found was this: the shadow often uses nightmares because fear is the fastest way to grab your attention. If you dream of being chased, look at what you've been avoiding. If you dream of falling, ask where you've lost your ground. If you dream of someone dying, ask what part of you needs to transform. Even recurring dreams can be the shadow's alarm bell, not to haunt you, but to wake you, to say, look here, there's something you've missed. But most people don't look. They brush it off. They wake up, roll over, and scroll. And yet, the soul doesn't forget. The dream continues to echo through your day, in your mood, in your body, in your choices, until one day you can't ignore it anymore. Here's something powerful Jung once said: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is what your dreams are trying to prevent. They're trying to interrupt the fate you're sleepwalking toward. They don't come to scare you. They come to show you what you've buried. There's an old parable from the Andes of South America told by Quechua mystics about a man who dreams of a jaguar every night. At first he is terrified. The jaguar chases him, corners him. Every time he wakes up in panic. He goes to a wise woman and asks her what to do. She says, next time the jaguar comes, stop running. Ask what it wants. That night the dream returns, the jaguar appears. The man is afraid but remembers the advice. He turns to the jaguar and asks. The jaguar stops, looks him in the eyes and says, I am your power. Why are you afraid of me? That's the shadow. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to give you back a piece of yourself. Sometimes the scariest dreams aren't nightmares at all. They're the parts of your soul that were once rejected, coming back in a form you can no longer ignore. This is why dream journaling, Jung insisted, wasn't just a hobby, it was a form of shadow work. When you write down your dreams, especially the ones that make no sense, you're allowing the unconscious to speak in full. You're saying, I'm ready to listen now. And the more you listen, the more your shadow trusts you. The more it shows, the less it hides. So the next time a dream disturbs you, stop asking what's wrong. Ask what's rising. Because maybe what feels like fear is actually your purpose returning in disguise. Mastering the shadow, the day you stop running. By now you've followed the shadow into your past. You've seen how it hides in your relationships, your dreams, your wounds, your silence. You've learned that the parts of you that hurt the most weren't trying to destroy you. They were trying to lead you back to something forgotten. But now comes the turning point, the final movement. Not just facing your shadow, but mastering it. And let's be clear, mastery doesn't mean winning. It doesn't mean your shadow disappears forever. It means you stop fearing it. You stop letting it make decisions behind your back. Carl Jung believed that true mastery of the shadow happens when you integrate it into your identity. When you stop pretending it's not you and instead ask, what do you need me to understand? It's the difference between being haunted by your darkness and becoming whole. He didn't believe this was a quick fix. Jung called it the work of a lifetime. But the longer you avoid it, the more power the shadow holds. And the longer you walk with it, the more you realize there was never a monster, only a message. A famous psychological study helps make this clear. In the 1970s, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment, where ordinary people were randomly assigned roles as guards or prisoners in a mock prison. What shocked the world was how quickly the guards turned aggressive, without being told to. These were not evil people, but something inside them got triggered, a part they had never met until the situation gave it permission. This study revealed something Jung had already warned us about. Every person carries a shadow, and unless it is made conscious, it controls us from the background. Even the parts we think we could never be can wake up under pressure. So what do? We meet that part before it's forced to meet us. We turn the lights on and walk into the basement of our being, on purpose. And when we do, we find that the shadow isn't just anger, shame, or fear. It's power, creativity, fire. It's the version of you that can't be controlled, the one that speaks up, the one that tells the truth. Welcome home. You made it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.